All right, welcome to the October 5th, Wednesday webinar here from USBE. I'm Julie Quinn, Coordinator in Assessment.
Whitney Phillips, Accountability Specialist.
And Terry Southam is with us as our new reporting specialist. Some of you may remember Terry from Endeavor Hall. We stole her she was the assessment director there for a number of years. So this is Terry's debut as our new reporting specialist here at USBE. So we have two agenda items that we know we need to talk about today with everyone. Again, apologies for the short notice on the URL. This URL you're using today is the same URL we will use for all of these first Wednesday of the month webinars. So just in case I drop the ball and don't send it to you again, that's what we're using. So we need to talk about some accountability items that Whitney's going to take us through, and then we need to address the benchmark modules through SAGE that have recently been released. We have some updates on the reporting system and some questions and things that you all have been asking. So to jump into the accountability, well, I guess before we jump into content, we are recording this presentation today. We will post it to our website under the Wednesday webinar section. We have a growing list of these presentations. And then most of you have been participants in our webinars through WebEx before, but there is the chat box in the bottom right-hand corner of the actual WebEx app that you can expand that chat bar and send us messages. And then towards the end of each of the two topics, you can unmute yourself and actually ask us questions if that's a better medium for you to ask questions. So the format of these webinars are typically to give you any updates that we have that we're pressing from our office, and then answer questions that are pressing to you in the field, kind of as a supplement to our assessment directors meetings. So let's talk about accountability for a minute.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah, so there's lots going on with accountability these days. The board has been actively engaged in accountability task force meetings, which is a subgroup of the board. There's 5 board members. Whitney knows who they are off the top of their head.
Slide.
Oh, that was brilliant. So the task force has been meeting to consider new ways, updated ways, or ways to update our accountability models. And this work has been somewhat feverishly happening in our office. And Whitney has been tasked by the Accountability Task Force and our state superintendency to elicit feedback from the field on these new indicators. So we do know that Whitney did a great job at the curriculum directors meeting. Was that last week? It might have been last week or the week.
26th.
Oh, okay, September. So Whitney did share this information with curriculum directors. Because of the infrequent meeting schedule of curriculum directors, they ended up hearing this before you all did, which we don't like to do, and apologize for any complications that caused you locally. We very much try to have you hear this information first as assessment directors. It just kind of worked out that we had to send Whitney to the curriculum directors meeting before we had this webinar. So we do apologize if that caused you any angst locally. This is the same presentation that she shared there that will be shared here today, and we will be asking for feedback from a number of stakeholder groups. So Whitney can talk through that process to inform what the board is looking to update the accountability systems with. Is that okay? That's a very good preview. So with that, I'm going to turn the camera over to Whitney and the rainy window behind her to take you through these slides. So you can click.
So they are seeing me, or are they seeing my slides?
They are seeing both.
Oh, well, so you lucky people. Hi. Again, this presentation was given once. The presentation only has a few slides. That is because the bulk of it is what we want to hear back from stakeholders. I am a carrier pigeon, which means I will take all of the messages that you give me, I will carry them over to the task force and give it to them. Whether any of your suggestions or comments have any effect on them is up to the task force. This presentation is just a starting point. It's a draft. It is a proposed measure. Everything is negotiable with this, and so please chime in of what you think of it. You're also welcome to email me with your comments and let me know if you would like to remain anonymous or not. So here we have, let's see, you can't see the slides?
Oh, how about we share the screen? That would be useful. Sorry.
Okay, so now they can see.
Now you should be able to see the screen.
And me.
We good? Oh, thank you, Terry.
So I'll behave. Here we are. Let's click to the next. So the Education Interim Committee, which is made up of legislators and board members, met on September 20th and approved us moving forward with getting stakeholder feedback. As you can see, the timeline for stakeholder feedback is very short, and that's why we needed to butt into as many existing meetings as possible rather than schedule some new ones. We are coming up with a calendar for stakeholder engagement that will be approved tomorrow by the task force, and we will share that with you as soon as it has been approved. So we have a little over a month to engage stakeholders, which include this webinar, and then we're going to present the information back to the task force, and the task force, USBE task force, and the Educational Interim Committee are going to get together and make these decisions of what we're going to do. I also wanted to give you a list of the Accountability Task Force members. You'll notice all of them are board members. The chair of the task force is Brittany Cummings, and there's a list of the rest of them. Along with their contact information, I know that they are open to hearing feedback from you. Coming straight from the field rather than through this mechanism might be even more effective. Who knows? So there's that information. We have a few questions we'd like you to keep in mind. The last one we'll ask at the very end. But the first questions are, we're going to show you some slides for the current system and the proposed system. Again, this is very draft form. If there's anything that you'd like to add, those recommendations on question 2, let us know. So I want you to go through and type in, or feel free to ask clarification questions, but what are the advantages and disadvantages of the proposed system that we're going over? What are recommendations you have? Would you, is something missing that you think would be a great indicator for school quality? So right now these are definitely not set in stone, so please, if you have any input, chime in as soon as possible. And then the third question here that we'll ask at the end is, in the event that SAGE is no longer used for accountability purposes at the high school level, would your LEA, would your school still be interested in having the benchmarks, interim and summative SAGE assessments for high school available to do whatever the LEA would like to do with them? So here we go. The first system, thank you, Julie. This is the elementary system, and Julie, please interrupt me if you see questions coming up. Right now we have SAGE as the indicator for academic achievement and growth, and we're talking about this would be replacing the school grading system. The proposed system also has SAGE remaining the same, and also the addition of DIBELS, and we would be using probably a growth metric there for grades 1 through 3, as kindergarten is not required, from what I understand. Also, an additional indicator that you'll notice on all of these levels is the English language proficiency, or progress indicator, that to be determined of how we measure that, but we would be using the WIDA access information. We have done a quick query, and the minimal N size of 10 ELs are present in 64% of the schools in Utah, and which is actually about the same as Arizona. I think Arizona was 67%, and so I know Wyoming's about 20%. So, we're trying to find ways to neither advantage nor disadvantage schools for meeting that N size requirement. And then school quality or student success. Right now there is no indicator on our current system. However, the Taskforce has recommended these indicators. With curriculum directors definitely had something to say about these additions. One of them is teacher attendance. There is no additional information on how that might be measured. And student suspension rates, not teacher suspension rates. So could you let me know if you have any questions or comments about this first slide?
Oh, they are?
So any comments that you type into the chat box, we're going to capture and include those in the body of feedback.
Without your name.
Yeah. Knowing that this is a very first look at some pretty big changes, right?
One other thing I wanted to mention, and I apologize, this is definitely not a side note information, is that the Taskforce also is looking at limiting the writing portion of the SAGE. They are thinking of limiting that to grades 5 and 8 with 1 prompt apiece. Again, that is not set in stone quite yet.
Yeah, and I'll speak to that for just a second. So it's interesting, it's been interesting to me that the Accountability Task Force has also presented changes to our assessment system. As a state board, there's been conversations around that. So, you know, you guys are aware of some of those conversations around the high school proposals. The elementary proposal is also not squared away yet. There's been conversation around whether or not to eliminate writing from everything but grades 5 and 8, but that is not set in stone at this time, nor the conversation of moving to 1 prompt. Those are ideas that have been thrown around by the task force and discussed openly at board meeting about ways to reduce testing time, honestly, and manage some of the concerns from the field that the board members have heard from their constituents and schools. So that's kind of a side issue. It affects the accountability because of the data coming into the systems, but it's a side issue. So it's not the main purpose of the feedback collection, but is an intertwined piece of it. Mm-hmm. So we see some comments coming in on the chat. Any of those statements are greatly appreciated in your response to any of this. So the limiting of writing to grades 5 and 8 with the addition of assessing only 1 prompt. If you see pros and cons to that over just reducing all grade levels to 1 prompt. We have expressed concerns to leadership here at USBE from our office about the effect that may have on needing to do a new standard setting, because that's not how the prompts were designed, especially if there's a time limit that's been talked about. So there's a lot of discussion going on here, and the more feedback that we have, the better we can represent that. So there's that issue. Then the new issue of the English language progress, which I think is a pretty exciting kind of thing, but don't mean to bias you towards that. If you don't love it, you can tell us you don't love that. But then the school quality. So this is what's been referred to in the accountability circles as the unicorn indicator, this mysterious indicator of school quality that no one really knows what it is. But we hear that it's out there, and we hear that it's amazing. So this teacher attendance issue, I'm not sure how you all feel about that. If there's mechanisms to collect that kind of data, what complications you see from an HR side on that. We've heard a lot.
The more specific you can give to the potential consequences for any of these indicators, including teacher attendance, would be really helpful. And we're getting a lot of feedback. I'm not responding to the feedback too much, but I sure appreciate it. Please keep it coming. This will definitely be included in our stakeholder engagement report that we get to the board.
Yeah, I'm looking at the feedback. So Erica and David Smith, there's a comment that teacher attendance as a metric would change district and school policy. If you could clarify how you foresee that changing, or what impact, referencing that it hurts teachers, if you could describe that locally, or even take a couple days to talk to your colleagues and try and paint the picture. If we were trying to report a teacher attendance rate, what that means for local policy changes and, quite honestly, data collection challenges around that. It's coming off of the research that shows in low-performing schools there are high teacher absenteeism rates, right?
Yeah.
Is kind of where that's been extrapolated from. I don't know how applicable that is to our scenarios because we don't have highly urban, dangerous schools as much as some of those schools that are in that research body. Not being terribly familiar with the research body myself. That's just what I think. So those are all fabulous comments. Okay, so there's some good right, some districts allow 2 personal days, other allow 10 personal days.
Yeah, there's a lot. We love to hear this specific feedback. Let's move on to the middle and junior high school. As you know, right now we have schools separated into 2 major groups: high schools and non-high schools.
Right.
We act like middle and junior high schools don't exist. In Utah, we have about 30 configurations, grade configurations for the schools, and so there is certainly not a one-size-fits-all way of looking at accountability. However, the task force recognizes that middle and junior high schools do function a little differently. As you can see here, there is no, we would keep SAGE for grades 3 through 8. So if the middle school had a 7th and 8th grade, I guess middle schools usually have 6, 7, 8, or 7, 8, like 9. I said, there's 30 different configurations. If you want to add another one, that would be great. But we have here, so we keep SAGE, and then we would include Aspire. Aspire is an ACT product. It's a flat form test. We don't know too much about it. It takes about 4.5 hours to administer, so about the same as SAGE. And so those are proposed for 9th grade. You can see that SAGE would be eliminated at the high school level. WIDA access would be the same throughout all of these 3 different models. And school quality or student success in middle school has yet to be determined. We don't have anything. I'm not quite sure why the task force didn't include the same indicators as elementary, but I think they are looking for an indicator for middle and junior high school. So if you've come across one, that's great. That would be lovely. One question was, how does growth work with Aspire in 9th grade? Well, with SGPs, as long as the tests are, the scores of the tests are normally distributed, we're able to look at, we can use SGPs from test to test. We did look at looking at CRTs to ACT. We ran that data. However, if you can remember, CRT scores were not normally distributed. They were inflated, making for a lot of error in the estimates. But that we don't have enough data to run any impact on that. So it's a little up in the air of how that would be measured. They would like to look at growth in high school, but it is, and that's for the next slide, but that's actually not required federally. That doesn't mean you can't look at it though.
So I'll speak to another question that's come in. We have lots of questions about ACT Aspire and what that might look like on the assessment side. Certainly that's a big change in going from SAGE to an ACT Aspire. So we are working on getting more visibility into alignment of ACT and ACT Aspire, what kind of alignment there is to state standards, what kind of overlap is there. We do know that the Aspire system is designed to be predictive of the ACT. So that's what we know about it so far. There are multiple inquiries. We're having regular meetings with ACT, trying to understand what the system is with Aspire and, you know, what, like I said, what are the standards it's aligned to? How do those match with Utah standards? What is being reported on? How would we address issues of growth between SAGE and Aspire, then Aspire to Aspire, then Aspire to ACT, looking at, you know, how we would calculate SGPs across the multiple measures. So there's lots and lots of questions.
Yeah, the alignment issues are definitely there, along with accommodations with ACT. There's a question, is anyone using Aspire this year?
So not in the state of Utah for accountability purposes. There are other states who have been using ACT at grade 11 and ACT Aspire at other grade levels in their state accountability systems. Mm-hmm. So we are looking to what they have done to address some of these challenges and issues. You know, this is all highly subject to both legislative changes and additional funding, because the ACT Aspire assessments for grade 9 and 10 are much more expensive than the money we've been spending at those grade levels for SAGE, like much. So there's several $1 million, at least a couple $1 million each year that we estimate the Aspire would need it to be funded above what is currently allocated for SAGE. So there are a lot of ifs here with moving to Aspire at 9 and 10. That decision certainly has not been finalized. The intent of the board has been made clear, but again, it is subject to legislative changes and additional funding. So we are exploring what this possibility would look like for Aspire at grades 9 and 10, learning as much as we can about it as fast as we can, and be looking for additional updates at the assessment directors meeting that I think was moved the week of what is fall break for many LEAs. Didn't we move it?
We did.
So that'll be coming. We'll be confirming the change to the assessment directors meeting for October shortly here. In fact, I'm going to write that down to make sure we actually get that to you.
Let's move on to high school, because a lot of the issues that you will have in high school will also apply to the other areas. But thank you. We are reading and keeping track of all of the comments and appreciate them. Can you go on to the next slide?
Oh, yes.
So here we have high school, and as I mentioned before, Aspire in 9th and 10th grade, along with the ACT 11th grade, would be used for both academic achievement and growth. WIDA Access would be used, and then there's two other indicators that we would like to discuss with you, and I have a few slides on those. The School Quality Student Success Indicator is listed as progress of at-risk students, and the College and Career Readiness is a combination of 11th grade ACT, graduation rate, and also completion of advanced studies, and we can go over that now. So the next slide, progress of at-risk students. There is some appetite in the task force, also the state board, and others for us to create a state level early warning system. I know that they are asking for it to be developed. Right now, we do not have such a system, although we are aware of a number of LEAs that have their own systems. We have been, the data and statistics team mostly have been working with these LEAs to see what their system is like. But essentially, here is what it might look like, is we would have to come up with a way of determining who is at risk. And this would be in a 9th grade cohort. We would look at whether the student has dropped out. That's probably an at-risk student who has dropped out in 9th grade. Attendance records, credit deficiency, or failure of a required graduation course. And so if you have any information about an early warning system, or you think that your LEA is knocking out of the park with your system and you'd like us to learn from that, I have Aaron Bruff's contact information there. He seems to be working a lot on that lately. And then we would be looking at, of those students that were determined to be at risk in 9th grade, what their performance was like in 10th grade, 11th grade, and finally graduation. And so it would be a focus on those students. We ran some preliminary impact data with some kind of more crude measures of how to measure at risk and how to measure success. A number of high schools have this at-risk population. And it's one benefit to this is you're not just looking at the 9th graders and then seeing if they graduate, you're actually looking at them in 10th grade, 11th grade. There is also the option of graduation being calculated not just for the 4-year graduation rate, but also 5 and 6, and some states even go up to 7 years. That is all on the progress of at-risk students. Any questions about this indicator, the progress of at-risk students? Anything else? Let's see.
Yeah, Whitney said this. I mean, we know some of you are doing this. You've got your own systems. I mean, we know that there's been some conversations, but we strongly encourage you to share with us what has been working for you and what has not with these early warning system kind of data sets and the interventions, or how the what am I trying to say? How the success is measured. You know, what are the outcomes that can be measured for this group of students that would show, you know, realistic and measurable and distinguishable across schools performance. So yeah, lots of conversations need to still occur on this, but we are all ears to what you want to hear. So Aaron has been running point on sort of the development of the system, but Joellen is heavily involved in it as well. Mm-hmm. So feel free to share your thoughts with Joellen above and beyond the conversations held with Aaron.
Yeah, good idea. Okay, and then the next indicator is what are advanced studies. This is the college and career readiness. Just to remind you, college and career readiness would be receiving a composite score of, we haven't determined, but probably something like an 18 on the ACT. Also completing graduation is part of this. And the third portion of this indicator is a completion of advanced studies. And this is a menu where a student must complete one of the following or more. So they have multiple opportunities to decide if they can participate. We know that all high schools do not have all of these programs, but we do know that all high schools have the opportunity to participate in at least one of these, usually several of these programs. And so that would include students that receive a 3 or higher on the AP test, a C or higher with concurrent enrollment, a passing grade with IB, a CTE certificate. We are in discussion with CTE of what that might look like. There are various levels and of completion and rigor with the CTE and they're looking at their data and the changes that they're making. And so we're trying to find out how that would be satisfied in accountability. Also passing a grade in an honors course. And this last one, I can't speak too much to because I myself don't totally understand this, but it's receiving a passing grade in a core course. And those are all of the indicators. So a student that had one of these following met, they would have considered having points. So this is very draft. Any comments on this indicator? Do you think there are advantages to it, disadvantages? Is there anything missing from this list? I know the curriculum directors mentioned having there's some kind of gold certificate or something for dual language. You can think of anything you'd like to add on to this menu, please let us know. This was intended to capture students, to capture more student and school achievement. That is the last slide.
Is that it?
That is the last slide. If you have any other information, please email it to me, but we are keeping all of your comments. So yeah, that's all.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Whitney. So yeah, email Whitney, email Joellen, email myself, email whoever you want to email with additional feedback. We will post Whitney's PowerPoint with the webinar recording so that you can have that for reference as you are discussing with your colleagues. I will go back just briefly to her slide with the timeline. I think I have the slide with the timeline. You still, oh, we're good. So Whitney, when do you need feedback from the field? Like soon?
By October 28th.
Yeah, so we've got a couple of weeks that you can continue to discuss with your colleagues and your local boards and whatever on what the impact of these accountability indicators may be. But the sooner we can get some substantial feedback from you, some substantive feedback, the sooner we can get that to the task board and the board in general, the superintendency as well, as they're working through these options and indicators. So I was stalling just a little bit to see if you had any other questions. And now I lost the chat bar. So let me go back to that. Let's see. Yeah, October 28th is your deadline for the feedback. But yeah, so that's a couple weeks away, a few weeks away, but the sooner the better on the feedback as decisions, board meeting is this week. So I know that Whitney is having points of contact with the task force multiple times a week on this topic. So, as is Joellen and Rich and the rest of our team. So anyway, there was a CTE comment. RCTs. Right. Okay, good. Right. Okay, great questions. Oh yeah, and then the final question Whitney asked was, would you continue wanting to use SAGE at the high school level? So this is interesting for us as we consider the impact of moving to an Aspire-based accountability system for high school. We've got this fairly substantial SAGE system at the high school that we've got in our back pocket. So what would you like us to do with that in an Aspire-based system? So that would be an important piece of information from us as well. We've got this benchmark system, which is a nice little segue into our next topic. We've got a pretty robust item bank that could be used in some sort of like end of course assessment for local purposes if you wanted to still give some sort of a summative measure in a secondary math 2 class, say, or chemistry or whatever. So I think it would be important for us to know if you want both an end of course option in addition to the benchmarks. Is all you need the benchmarks? There's been quite a bit of talk from some LEAs where we've received feedback that an end of course assessment would be important for local purposes to track programmatic quality across years. So that's that. Question, can you show the advanced courses slide again, please? Yep, let me see if I can click through to that. Right, so you can take a picture of that if you want until we get it posted. We'll post these in the next day-ish to the website as well.